Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I'm very much a prompter on this panel of experts and feel very lucky to be here. It's a topic of so much importance to the festival as a whole and to each of us as individuals finding ourselves on this land, to learn more and to understand and connect with the ancestral wisdom of the lands we find ourselves in, and and the healing arts, or the ancestral practices as healing arts. With me here are Carr Gomm, Charlotte Pulver, and Andy Letchner. Philip is the founder of the Order of the Bards, Ovates, and Druids, of which he was at the helm of for many years. Was it 1988 until 32 years? Yeah. So it's a big, important role and a big figure within the movement of Druidry. Oh, you weren't the founder, but important figure. 32 years at the helm. But also involved in other things now. ACER Integration Program, which is co-founded by Ros Watts, who was going to be here with us this weekend and sadly couldn't. So just a shout out to all of her amazing work with ACER. Charlotte Pulver is from a long line of apothecarists, alchemist herself, was just dosing me up on one of her love potions at the back. You can find her in her stall down here, and has had a big impact on me as well, through her understanding of springs and water and you and the medicine of many indigenous plants. And Andy Letchner, who is a senior lecturer at Schumacher College and the program lead for the MA Engaged Ecology. It's a very cool title to be the program lead of. I think everyone should check out Schumacher College as well. And Andy wrote a book many years ago, more than 15 years ago now, on shrooms and their culture, their role, the cultural and historical understandings of them. And I think maybe we could start with a question as a way for each of them to introduce themselves to everyone around the spiritual practices or the spiritual traditions that they follow or are important to them, how they came across them, the role of them in their lives. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was incredibly lucky. I when I was 11, I met the old chief druid who was a friend of my father's. And there were two really powerful influences in my early life. One of them was psychedelics in that era in the 70s when they were quite popular. And the other was coming across the druids. And they were very different worlds. And the druid group that I was involved in, this old chief druid, was kind of coming out of this Victorian magical order kind of world of the esoteric studies and so on. And all my friends who I was sitting in different circles with, my contemporaries thought I was crazy to be involved with these old folk who were probably in their 50s or something, I don't know. But somehow those two experiences, and what united them both was this extraordinary story that's at the heart of the Druid tradition, really, of Caridwen's cauldron and the elixir that is brewed in this cauldron, made from plants and charged by the stars and so on, that can bring illumination, bright knowledge. But also it can bring destruction as well, baleful knowledge. And so this awareness of the power, I became aware as I saw the casualties of my generation with psychedelics, and I saw the good that they had done as well. That kind of took me on a journey of following Druidry for the next 50 years, to find myself now, just in the last few years, working with them both again. I've forgotten what the question was, but is that enough?
Spiritual traditions that you follow, their role in your life.
Yes. So I suppose I could call myself an eclectic druid. I love spiritual teachings of all kinds, and I think we're probably all natural jackdaws who, take from all sorts of different traditions that feed us. But druidry provides a container for me and a context and a way of understanding, rooted in nature, that helps me. So that's my primary path, as it were. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. And thank you, Philip and Andy. It's wonderful to be with you both and everyone here today. Okay, so the container that I work with, which is really dear to my heart and helps me keep grounded here on the planet, is the system of alchemy. I'm sure you've heard that word a lot. It's culturally used so much. It's kind of quite a trendy word, I feel, at the moment. But we're all calling for that inner transformation. So within the British culture, in our heritage, we have a very strong alchemical tradition, which a lot of people aren't aware of. And it's woven so deep in the roots of these lands. And historically, it's written in the text that, it really came over to the UK in the 700s. But my instincts, it's been just naturally practiced as the general zeitgeist way back before then. And so they're maps of consciousness. And what alchemy really is, so I'll tell you what it is, because a lot of people are like, it's transforming lead into gold. And that is not what alchemy is. In a nutshell, what it is understanding how consciousness embodies into matter, and how consciousness leaves matter. So it's understanding those cycles of consciousness in its embodiment into this physical form within ourselves and within all of nature, and understanding what is within is without. There is no separation. And maybe I'll talk more about it later on, but this is the system I work with, and connecting to the consciousness of the plants is at the center of medical alchemy. Yes, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Is this on? Yes, it is. Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I had a beautiful talk planned in my head. I knew exactly what I was going to say. And needless to say, when you're sitting on stage, that's all drained away. And so into the empty void of my mind, let's see what springs. So this is not a call for sympathy, but a couple of weeks ago I turned 55. Yeah, it's no cause for celebration, really. It's a miracle. And I started calling myself a pagan when I was 15. So I've been involved in this search for ancestral knowledge in these lands for 40 years. And I was raised loosely, I say very loosely, in the Church of England. I had the kind of parents who went to church on Christmas and Easter and in between. And about the time when teenage hit, and often people get religion, don't they, in their teens, and I felt that kind of yearning, that quest for something. I did really seriously investigate Christianity because it was in the family. And in the end, it wasn't for me for two reasons. One was that the stories, I just couldn't relate to them because they were from a land I didn't know, a land I could feel was arid. And I grew up in rural Devon, falling into streams and sailing on the River Dart and playing in woods. I wanted something that was more leafy. And the other reason was that as a child I kept fainting in church and I had to be carried out. And I would come to under a 1,000-year-old yew tree. And then, when I was a bit older, lots of people getting into Buddhism or yoga or that Eastern kind of thing. And again, I felt the same. I could see there was amazing stuff in these traditions, phenomenal stuff, these ancient traditions. But it's not here of this land. And maybe now as well. I mean, I'm supremely interested in indigenous cultures and indigenous wisdom, and deeply humbled by the wisdom keepers who come here and what they have to offer. And it's someone else's culture and it's someone else's medicine. And I don't live in the rainforest. I live in the temperate rainforest of Devon, or what should be temperate rainforest. So it's been a 40-year quest to try and find what we have here. And to answer your question about what I do, just before I came here, I was with my kids who are dutifully sitting in the front. Thank you for coming. We were making collages in the kids area, and they were cutting out magazines and making beautiful images. And I thought, actually, that's a beautiful metaphor for what I do, because I didn't grow up in a traditional culture. I didn't have someone to teach me this stuff. I've had to find it, jackdaw-like, bits and pieces. So I've been a member of OBOD, active member during the 1990s. Had a long, long relationship with psychedelics. I've been a scholar of religion, I've done the academic thing. And often, I just make stuff up. So to just give you... Well, I'm a great believer. Someone had to make this stuff up, right? They may have done it 2,000 years ago, but someone has to make it up. So let me give you an example. With the family, they're now of an age where getting them out of bed to watch the winter solstice sunrise is now an impossibility. It's met with a certain amount of resistance. So we've created a ritual where every winter solstice we walk to our local sacred hill, this beacon, Yana Beacon, whose name means the hill where the eagles fly. No eagles there anymore. And we drink hot chocolate, and we'll give some hot chocolate to the hill. And that's our winter solstice ritual. We've done that for 2 years now, and it's already got a feeling of this is what we do. It's the winter solstice. So I'm still on that hunt. I'm still trying to find it, but not afraid to make things up.
Andy, can I just... what you said reminded me of something else that you made up.
Make it all up, Philip.
And what you've said explains it. There's that wonderful song. You are or were in a band called Singing the Bees? Telling the Bees. And there's a track which goes, church, and in the lyrics you say, church bells ring, I'm glad they do. What's the next line?
Thank you. 55-year-old memory, not what it was. The church bells ring. I'm so glad they do, but I can't join in.
But I can't join in, and it's the call of the trees, isn't it? It's
the worship
of the trees.
Yeah. That's
it. It's like a kind of druid tree anthem kind of thing, isn't it? And I think your experience echoes exactly mine, and I'm sure lots of people that brought up in the Church of England kind of culture, is that inability to connect with the stories. The music might be incredibly elevating or whatever, but I could never connect with the stories as a kid, and so this search for ancestral traditions is really important, I think.
I remember it's so refreshing to hear an academic and scholar saying, "Oh, we just have to make it all up," and I remember hearing something similar from another scholar and researcher and academic called Sharon Blackie, and she would talk about. She's done decades of research into Celtic mythology and history, and there's so little that remains written about the practices, partly because they were all handed down through word of mouth, and obviously partly because they were erased, because they didn't form part of the dominant narrative. And now that so many people are trying to re-find our connection to these lands and to these practices, and we are having to make them up, it also feels perhaps there's a fine balance between making them up and having something that's rooted within a tradition or rooted within a group of people, like there is the OBOD, druidry, one line. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about this balance, if it's something that you thought about before, or if there isn't a balance and we should all just be making it all up all the time, and if you had any reflections on these things.
Grayson Perry said this wonderful thing. He said, you have to be still in the forest clearing in order to let the little furry animals come into the clearing. And that's a fabulous image, because what I take from that is this idea, you ask yourself, well, where are these furry animals coming from? Are they coming from my own? If we take this as a metaphor for creativity, you see, where is the furry animals coming from? If we had a kind of a reductionist view of the world, we'll say, well, they can only come from your personal unconscious. So anything that you make up, it's got to be yours, and it's all the things that you've read and seen and smelt and heard over, and it all goes down into your unconscious, gets mixed around, and then pops up in different ways. But if you are not a reductionist and you believe, say, in the collective, so you take a more Jungian approach, if you like, and you sense this collective consciousness, then you can accept the fact that the furry animal isn't maybe coming from your personal unconscious, but is coming from the collective. You know that time when you tune into something and you get something and it feels like it's not yours, it's coming from the collective. If you take an even kind of wider view and you like a concept like the divine or something like that, then that furry animal might be coming from the divine. So then the question about who is making it up comes into play, because you say, well, you know, this came to me, and those of us engaged in kind of creative pursuits are familiar with that extraordinary phenomenon of where something is coming out of us, either in painting or speaking or writing or whatever, and it doesn't seem to come from ourselves. You know, so often people say, well, I didn't really write that book or lyric or poem or whatever it is. And so just the idea about who's making this up is a really interesting question. And so the way I look at it is that these ancestral, it's very easy for us to look at ancestral traditions as if there's something in the past. And we say, oh dear, we've lost our ancestral traditions because of the coming of Christianity in the 6th and 7th century, and wiped it all out. And we've got to kind of dig down and find these things way back in the past. But what if we think about it in a different way, that these traditions, these kind of energies, inspirations, stories, beings, creatures are exist at another level, and they can inspire us at any time, and we can just be the conduits for them. So the ancestral living tradition is actually a living tradition.
So in our culture of individualization, we think that we're often like the only ones here who have this deep longing to be witnessed by others and by the plant world and the trees. That you know, we have that longing. It's quite a common feeling and theme. But I can tell you that everything in nature and the land and the plants and the trees equally have that longing as well, to be witnessed and met in union by us as well. So like the ancestral wisdom and connection has not gone. It is humming so strongly in the land and the trees and the waters, and it's just yearning to be witnessed by us and be received in reciprocity. And form that union. It is so waiting for all of us to meet it. And like that is really like the heart of my work, is to teach people how to do that. Because a lot of people say to me, Charlotte, how can I connect to my ancestors? What's the way, you know? And I find my gateway is so simple. It's by connecting to the plants, the trees and the waters. And people might say, how can we do that? You know, what's the way, you know? And it's all in our bodies. We have this profound technology in our 5 senses, in our ears, our eyes, our nose, our taste, our touch. You know, within our 5 senses are the 5 elements of creation, when you really start to understand this. And when you use your 5 senses, if you were to go up to the tree and say a simple question like, what is your medicine? You know, I'd love to get to know you, you know, and use your 5 senses and just receive the information that comes to you totally unfiltered, giving yourself a full permission slip, just not to edit yourself with your frontal lobe, which thinks it knows everything, the thinking mind. Allow yourself to feel and drop in to your feeling body, which actually activates your ancestral mind, which is in the center of your brain, which most of us in our culture doesn't activate, because our culture doesn't ask for us to use our senses on a daily basis, because it's not for our survival. But when you use your senses, your 5 senses, and really get to engage with the plants and anything you're wishing to commune with, the information that you receive is of a so different level, and your body just knows. It just knows. And just trust yourself when you want to have that conversation, what you're receiving. And so what you often receive in relation to what we're discussing about making it up, nature doesn't lie, okay? So what you will receive is often what you need to hear as well. It's a beautiful, pure reflection of you and where you're at as well. And when you engage with nature with your senses, and just one by one using your senses, asking, what is your medicine? I'd love to get to know you. And just feeling it in your body, you receive a profound amount of healing and you come into a union. It's very psychedelic. You don't need to take something and start tripping your balls off, okay? This is natural. We are naturally psychedelic. Start using your senses. You know, let your body feel the information. A lot of people in our culture think that to know something, we must read it. We must be told. We must be told by a teacher because that's the only way to know something. But that is just such a tiny part of wisdom. The wisdom from the feeling body really activates your soul. It's on a whole different level. So I always say to people, go and talk to the plants first, feel them, see what they have to say, and then read it in a book. If you read it in a book first and then you go and chat to the plant, you'll be so you'll be so infiltrated by what you've learned, and you've lost a real soul connection. So go and feel, chat to them, and use your senses.
Beautiful, thank you. What to add to this? Well, maybe I can talk about different ways of knowing, different forms of knowledge. And this rests on a play on words, two words that sound the same but are spelt differently. Law, spelt L-A-W, and lore, L-O-R-E, as in folklore. And the etymology of law, L-A-W, is laying something down or staking something out. And those of us in modern Western cultures, European cultures, are very used to the idea of scientists finding knowledge. As an academic, I'm under pressure to produce knowledge. Knowledge is something that needs to be generated and discovered, laid down, staked out. Knowledge is scarce. That's why we need to invest huge amounts of money in institutions like universities and science laboratories to find this knowledge, because that knowledge is power, it's economic power. But in loric cultures, L-O-R-E, there's no scarcity of knowledge. All the knowledge is there. It's held by the elders. And when you reach a point when you're worthy of that knowledge, when you've earned the right to that knowledge, then it's given to you. And we don't live in a loric culture. We have an abundance of lore and folklore, but as I was saying earlier, we don't have teachers, or I certainly didn't. I think this is what I'm seeing at this festival, and in my 40-year quest is this hunger for a loric culture. And within loric cultures, community is everything. And so if you make something up, it will get accepted into that body of law if there's community agreement that there's congruence, that there's wisdom, that there's truth in that. And let me give you an example of a story that was told to me by a teacher who comes to Schumacher College, Colin Campbell. He's a Southern African diviner and healer. And he tells a story of a woman who, I don't know what tribe she's from, or what her name was, but she was out in the bush, and did someone say sorry? Did I hallucinate that? Oh, okay. I'm just used to students objecting to what I'm saying, so just down. I'll take objections later. So this woman's far out in the bush, and there's a storm brewing. I've never been to Africa, but I've seen enough David Attenborough to imagine the storm coming on the horizon. You can imagine the boiling clouds and the flashes of lightning in the distance. Can you see that? Out on the plains, with the plains of Africa. And then suddenly this herd of giraffe run across in front of her, and a song comes. She gets a song, and she brings it back home, and she sings it, and everyone goes, yeah, amazing song. And they sing that song, and that becomes part of the repertoire of their songs. And in fact, anytime she's feeling a bit down, or they feel like her place in the community needs building up, they sing her song. So in Lauric communities, it's a fluid thing. Like you're saying, we're so used to the text as the authority, the written word. We must be able to find it in a text. And if it's not written down somewhere, it can't be true or it can't work. But if we're to ever move to a Lauric community, yes, we open up that space between us and the other, whether it's a yew tree or an animal, whatever it is. And then if something comes and the community accepts it, it becomes part of law. So just 2 days ago, Charlotte took us on the most amazing journey to visit a yew tree, and we sang to a yew tree, and we chanted the names of yew trees in different languages. And I'm sure there is no written record of anyone ever having done that in the British Isles before. Well, maybe last year. I don't know if you did it last year. But it felt congruent. And we went there yesterday and we did it. We repeated the ritual. So this is how it works, I think.
Thinking of singing to yew trees reminds me of a pilgrimage that I did with Guy Hayward, who's here in the audience, who's the founder of the British Pilgrimage Trust. And Philip is also on the board. Are you involved? Yeah, something. He's a something. And pilgrimage is a old practice. And something that was illegal in the British Isles due to the Reformation, and has now been being revived as a tradition for anyone of any religion. And I recommend checking out the British Pilgrimage Trust to see more about that. But pilgrimage, I personally found, was such a beautiful way to connect with land and to connect with sacred places and sacred sites and sacred beings like a yew tree, just as much as an ancient church or an ancient stone circle. And I wonder if you wanted to share a little bit about sacred sites, what they are, why it's important that we protect them, and if you have any reflections on pilgrimage as well, and this kind of ritualized journeying to sacred sites.
Yes, that's a great question. I love the idea that they were illegal. I mean, like when Guy told me that they were illegal in Britain, I mean, how many people knew that pilgrimage was illegal? Did anybody know that? It's like no hand. One hand is being raised. Yeah, two hands being raised. Because it was against the law because Henry VIII, the Reformation. So there's something about the power of that act of moving from one place to another, and just to sort of connect with what was being said before in both Charlotte and Andy's contributions just then. There was a strong sense in which how our sense of distance and proximity is so important to this. So we talk about ancestral traditions, and there's a way in which we can immediately feel that they're far away. And so the invitation is to say, no, what if they're not far away? What if we've been understanding them in the wrong way? Or there's another way to understand them, which is that it's all around us. It's in the land. The ancients wrote it, it's here. So that's one thing. And then Charlotte mentioned, I've forgotten exactly what it was, but whatever it was, it triggered this about coming to you. Yes, the trees talking to you and listening to the trees. And this idea that, again, we're yearning and seeking and looking. And then to flip it around and say, what if these things are looking for us? What if the ancestral tradition is looking for us? And the lady who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert, wrote a book called Big Magic about creativity, which is really very, very good. And it reflects absolutely the sort of the ideas central to druidry, about the idea that ideas are looking for us. They're looking for willing collaborators. And that's an interesting, whether or not this is true or not in any sort of kind of ultimate sense, it doesn't matter, but it just does something profound to you if you, instead of straining and trying to get ideas, you flip it around and you say, no, ideas are trying to get me. I just have to relax and open up and kind of receive the ideas. Same thing with trees and plants. It's very easy to say, what can I bring and what can I do? But open up, receive. So something about nearness and farness away is significant here, I think. And in terms of sacred sites, I think one of the things that excited me when I was young and met the old druid who was the founder of the order. I'm not the founder of the order, it was Bards, Ovids and Druids. It was my teacher, Ross Nichols, who was a poet and a historian. And one of the things that excited me was this idea of the magical landscape. When I was a kid, it was like there were still bomb sites in London. It was that kind of post-war era, and as everybody knows, the whole of Britain was in black and white until 1968 or something like that. And then suddenly somebody switched on the colour, and everybody was smoking pot in Hyde Park, and it was all wonderful. And I was just lucky enough to be around at the time. So a part of my life was dealing with ugliness, strangely enough, taking the bus from Notting Hill Gate home round to Swiss Cottage every day and going through really kind of gloomy, dark winter streets and so on. And then the idea that he introduced me to, and he had his spiritual name was Newen, the ash tree. So in druidry you can often take on the name of a tree. So it was Newen. Newen introduced me to this idea of that there's a magical landscape. There are thousands of sacred sites. There's this network of sacred sites and ley lines connecting them, lines of energy and power. And this was a terribly exciting idea for me. And I can't think of anything else to say. But so they're important and integral. And that immediately brings you back to this sort of idea I was talking about in terms of proximity and nearness. That you can play with this. When you go on a pilgrimage, in a way, you play with the idea that what you need or want is over there. Deep inside, you know it's actually here. But you tell yourself, for the purposes of the game, that I'm going to walk to Avebury, I'm going to walk to Stonehenge, I'm going to do that, and I'll find it when I get there. Or I'll open up and receive. And that's an interesting thing to do with the psyche, I think. Okay.
All right, so pilgrimage. I love a good pilgrimage, and I realise that really started off as a youngster. So a lot of my life I was living in London, 30 years in the city, and I'd say that the city gave me a really good training in pilgrimage and connecting to the plants, actually. And so, like as a young child, I'd just get a map. Back then we didn't have Google. We had A to Z of London. Open the map, and I just mark things out. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go on a magical quest today. And off I would trot and like rope in some friends. And then later on in my life, in my teenage years, I've always felt connected to water. It's like, especially in the city, connecting to water and finding out where all the springs were is what helped keep me sane. Like help, emotionally balanced. Go and find a spring. But as a teenager, I always thought that I had to go outside the city to do that. I had to go, to the sacred sites outside the city. But then one day, a long time ago, I was trying to find a postcode to send a letter to my friend, and I know she lived next to a church. And so I just looked up the name of the church, and I saw the website, and I was looking at the website, and I saw, it's got a sacred spring inside the church. And suddenly, like a light bulb moment went off in my head after living in the city for so long. It's like, of course, there's so many springs in London. So I went to drink from this spring water from a very ancient church in Willesden, realizing Willesden is connected, means well at the end of the hill, and it's in the borough of Brent, which is sacred. Is Brent connected to Brigid? Yeah, I think she's connected to Brigid, goddess, one of the goddess of these isles. So anyway, to help keep me sane in the city, I decided just to go off on all these pilgrimages and just start to map out where all the springs of London were. Those which you could access, water, touch, some of them you could drink from, and those which were capped, which many buildings were on top of. But I wanted to go and like just stand there and see if I could feel the energy. So then I just realized that all the springs were obviously fed by the 21 underground rivers which flowed through London and then flowed into the Thames. So it was through the waters and mapping them out that I really started to understand pilgrimage. And our ancient ancestors, of course, the trackways were always connected to the waterways, because water is what would sustain them for their animals and for their own lives, sustenance. So a lot of these trackways, of course, would be to the holy springs, to the wells. So it was through that. And then one day, Ben Christie, who's one of the sort of visionaries and founders of Medicine Festival, he said, "Charlotte, I'd love you to take us on a pilgrimage to the springs of London. It's about 30 of us. Would you do that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." And this was in 2019. And then he told XR, it was for the April XR in 2019. And he told XR, and I was like, "No, you didn't, did you?" And he's like, "Yeah, I did." He's like, "Oh, there's going to be a lot of people on this pilgrimage." And that's when I met Guy Hayward for the first time, and Sam Lee as well. So it was on that pilgrimage, so much of us converged together on this beautiful day, and there was like at least 500 people on this pilgrimage through London. And I have to tell you, like, we always think that we have to go on pilgrimage to Stonehenge and Avebury and Cornwall. I tell you, my favourite pilgrimages are in London. Like, honestly, the most powerful pilgrimage I love to host is in London. And I never thought I would ever say that. But I call it the Sovereign Line. We start at Tower Hill and we end up at Westminster Abbey. We walk an old trackway which the monarchs used to walk. So at Tower Hill, that's where the crown jewels are held. The crown, yeah. Okay, so I see this pilgrimage as a map of the body. So it's like, and a lot of, when you start to understand how powerful London is, you'll understand so much part of our culture. So it starts in Tower Hill, which once upon a time was called Bryn Gwyn, or the White Hill, or the White Raven. And I'm sure these beautiful men can tell you more about that. But it's a deeply ancestral mound to the spirit of sovereignty. And that is why should we say, the dominant culture which came in, which was the Normans, decided to build their castle on top of Tower Hill, this beautiful ancient sacred mound to the spirit of sovereignty, because it's the crown. It's where you connect to the ancestors, like from the top of your head. And there's a reason why the ravens are kept at Tower Hill, and it goes back to really ancient lore connected to the ravens and Bran the Blessed. And yes, so I'm really babbling because I love this pilgrimage, but I just wanted to say to you, so like the monarchs, so we obviously we had a coronation this year, didn't we? That's right, yeah. Anyway, so back in the day, the monarchs to be would walk from Tower Hill all the way to Westminster Abbey, so from the crown to the root, and they would pass through the heart of London, the belly of London, and then the root is where they would be crowned on earth, bringing heaven to earth. That's what that pilgrimage is about. So when we do this pilgrimage, which I have the honor and blessing to do with Sam Lee, he was talking previously just now, and a beautiful druid called Chris Park. When we walk this pilgrimage, we walk with the old law. So we were just talking about law. And I love like just being able to like grasp just pieces of the old law, which are like maps which can help guide us now in our paths, right now in the present, in the future, to guide us, the ancient roots. So the old law to what sovereignty really is about, because it's quite a trendy word, you know, again. The old understanding of what sovereignty is, and to be sovereign is in service to the all. but married to the earth. Okay? So when we walk this pilgrimage in London, we walk with that intention of a pledge of allegiance to the earth on that day, in helping us step into our sovereignty and in that balance of reciprocity. So yeah, that is really part of a route that I try and connect with every day, because every day, the earth is asking us to pledge her allegiance with her in service to the all. Thank you.
So I think the root of this is that different places feel different. And over time, again, in this lauric sense, certain places become places of destination. So Stonehenge feels different from Avebury, feels different from Glastonbury Tor, feels different from the stone circles on Dartmoor or in Cumbria. But just to follow on from what you were saying, that you can do pilgrimage anywhere because everywhere feels different. And there's a long tradition of people walking London. And you can do it anywhere, just pick a line, pick a straight line, pick a wiggly line, walk the ring road of your town, walk from the center of your town out until you can no longer feel the town. How far do you have to go before your town actually stops, not physically stops? Because the land feels different. Where are you drawn to go? Where are you repelled from? Because some places don't feel good and they don't feel safe. So I think that's the root of it, is that there's something intrinsic in the land that draws us to certain places. Some places feel special, they feel holy, they feel sacred. The other kind of key point of pilgrimage, I think, is that, again, I'm drawing on Colin Campbell here, but he would say that the point of it is to render yourself porous, pervious, to open yourself up, to make cracks in the carapace that we grow over ourselves. Pilgrimage is not meant to be a jolly romp, in spite of what Chaucer had us believe. It's hard work, and you're going to get blisters, and you're going to be miserable and tired, and that's the point. And if I may, I'll just share a personal story of a pilgrimage I did in my late 20s, to Avebury, of course. I felt like I didn't have an easy transition to adulthood. And I thought, what I need is a rite of passage. I need to do something that's going to scare me shitless. Then I will conquer my fear. And as a child, I'd been very frightened of the dark. And I immediately knew what I needed to do. And I needed to walk to West Kennet Long Barrow, this prehistoric burial mound that is open, and spend a night there alone, because I knew that would terrify me. And I thought, I'll come out and I'll feel amazing. There'll be a choir of angels singing. You can imagine the music, like on the main stage. So about halfway through day one, I realized that I was not quite as fit as I thought I was. Developed severe sciatic pain in my right leg. And I limped into Avebury on day 3, immediately flopped down, took my rucksack off, and lay in a very large pile of runny sheep shit. So I was covered from head to foot in sheep shit. It'll be great. It's just teething problems. I made it to West Kennet Long Barrow. There were people there, and I was a bit sort of grumpy because I, didn't want people there spoiling my ritual. I was 27. To know up from down. I'm trying not to get distracted by all the naked people up there. Anyway, 2 o'clock in the morning, there I am in West Kennet Long Barrow, sitting in the dark, in abject misery, just utter misery. I'm terrified. I'm cold. It's damp. I'm not feeling anything remotely magical, just dejection of the worst possible kind. And then at 3 a.m, these tourists come in and start having this conversation. Oh, it looks like there's someone in there. Trying to do a fucking ritual here. And I stayed there till dawn, and I crawled out on my hands and knees. And I thought, I need help. I can't do this on my own. Which is when I joined OBOD, actually. and honestly, if I hadn't, so I came out with this dramatic sense of failure, and thinking, oh, everyone else is more magical than me. Why is it never happens to me? I don't get the vision. I would not be sitting here now in this position if I hadn't done that ritual and joined OBOD, and I met extraordinary people through that, and I ended up doing a PhD in the study of religion, yada, yada, yada. Something worked, but the most important bit of it was that it succeeded because I rendered myself pervious. I was cold, I was wet, I was miserable, I was dejected, and all that silly ego stuff about being blessed as some chosen magical person was beautifully squashed in a pile of runny sheep shit.
Thank you, Andy. I love that story. It's also really interesting, this kind of innate desire that we all have to put ourselves through extreme experiences, to have this sense of catharsis or awakening or whatever it is that helps us to have a spiritual experience sometimes, or a pivotal moment in our lives, a rite of passage. And also how these can be ritualized. And it makes me want to ask you a question that's particularly in relation, Andy, to much of your scholarly work around the role of ritualized use of psychedelics in ancestral practices in Britain, in the British Isles, and also in contemporary use among druids, for example. And I think it would be great to hear your perspectives too, Philip, and Charlotte, perhaps about using other medicinal plants.
So I encountered psychedelics in my teens, with my first mushroom experience when I was 19, and this didn't exist. We didn't have an internet. The way you kept in touch with people was through festivals, free festivals, and there was a completely different paradigm in operation in the late 1980s. You know, this was the era of crusties and free festivals and the Battle of the Beanfield. And psychedelics were all about freeing your mind from the man and seeing through the Matrix, even though the Matrix hadn't been made yet as a movie. But it was about undoing the conditioning of society to free yourself so you could lead a more authentic life. And that meant the context for consuming them was festivals, gigs, you know, hippie bands. And I've made all the rookie errors. I could write the book on how not to do it. You know, don't have a psychedelic 30th birthday party that gets raided by the police and a police helicopter. We didn't have integration in those days. We just got on with it. Gradually one realizes that there needs to be some kind of holding, that if you know. And yeah, there's so much to say. So I'm going to put my scholarly hat on here. What I'm observing in the evolution and emergence of psychedelic culture in Britain, two things are happening. On the one hand, you've got the mainstream legitimization of psychedelics, legitimized by some hardcore neuroscience, peer-reviewed papers, all that kind of stuff. And we're seeing also the capitalization of psychedelics. So already in America, In Oregon, psychedelic-assisted therapy is becoming legalized, and there are trained therapists, and you can pay inordinate amounts of money to go and have a high-dose psilocybin therapeutic experience. I've got no objection to that. Who could object to people getting well? On the other hand, we've got a more underground scene, which is very much informed by indigenous wisdom. This is people going off to the Amazon and going off to Gabon and going off to Mexico and engaging with a different kind of technology, a ritual technology for holding these experiences and leading people through the lore, L-O-R-E, of these traditional cultures. And what I'm witnessing as a scholar who writes about this stuff is that there's a hunger, I think, for people to go, well, what's our medicine? What's our context? And here I think druidry is playing a part. So I've been doing a little bit of research on druids who use psychedelics. And it's been remarkably hard to find people who would talk to me or who would fess up to it. I think it's probably within mainstream druidry, it's probably quite a small number of people who are doing it. I think the more interesting direction of travel is that the medicine community is looking to find an indigenous context for taking psychedelics and are starting to look towards things like druidry, paganism, magic, these traditions from the British Isles. Give you one example. They're not happening anymore, but for a while up in Liverpool, a group of druids were holding monthly mushroom ceremonies within a druidic context for all comers. And so they would hold space in a particular way, call the elements in a way that would be very familiar to contemporary druids, play music that was fitting to a druidic ceremony, harp music, Celtic-y kind of music, and apparently with great success. So that to me as a scholar is very, very interesting. We're seeing this emergence of local context for local medicines. Philip, I don't know if you want to...
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, I think in the work that I've been doing the last 2 years with the Synthesis Institute and then with the ASA program with Ros Watts, there's this, the really important stress on set and setting and intention and integration, all these things that make it different for when we were kids doing this, where we didn't have all this. Well, we had set and setting, which was the great contribution of Ram Dass. The way I think there was the Ken Kesey electric Kool-Aid acid test sort of school of thought, which is just go wild anywhere and do it. And then there was the Ram Dass, set and setting and be careful and and give it a spiritual context. And so I was lucky to have followed that path when I was younger. And now we see this much more responsible kind of attitude, coming from particularly from the psychotherapeutic and neuroscience world. And so when you ask the question, okay, set and setting, I get it, and intention, all the rest of it. I would like to have that within a spiritual framework. I mean, what we were doing in the retreats that I've been working with as a facilitator in Holland and so on, is to put it bluntly, a kind of mashup of influences from South America, North America, a little bit of Celtic stuff that I was invited to do occasionally and so on. But to be fair, it worked because they're drawing on the same kind of universal principles, I think. But I think what you say, Andy, is so interesting that certainly druidry, which is the particular pagan way that I'm familiar with from these lands, does provide a context for it, particularly since this foundational story has a sort of psychedelic theme to it, the cauldron with the elixir and so on, and this idea of inspiration. So, yeah. So this is a, and I think, am I right in saying you wrote a paper? You did the research on a paper like about 2 years ago. 4 years ago, and you found it hard to find druids who would fess up, as you say. And when we talked on the phone more recently, a lot has changed in 4 years, hasn't it? A lot has changed. So I was in Glastonbury 2 years ago, or maybe 1 year ago, I can't remember because the pandemic's messed with my memory. It may have been last summer or the summer before, with Ros Watts on a stage like this in Glastonbury at one of our big Obod Druid gatherings. And we had a conversation, just Ros and I, about the psychedelics, druidry, and the trees. And I was very cautious because I didn't want my fellow druids to think that I'd sort of gone feral and was recommending illegal activity that So I prefaced it by pointing out that my sister actually, psychedelics triggered a psychosis in her, and I spent 50 years visiting her every week in the psychiatric hospitals and halfway houses. So I'm very, very aware of the baleful knowledge that can come from the cauldron as well. But what was heartening was to sense in the room. It was a fantastic conversation. It's up on YouTube if you Google psychedelics, druidry, and the trees. And we talked about the trees, we talked about psychedelics, we talked about druidry, and there were some great questions from the audience. It feels like a moment whose time has come. It's a bit like walking around this festival now. I don't know whether you have this feeling, both of you, but it's a moment it feels so right and natural, and there's a kind of warmth, and the presence of the trees is such an integral part. Imagine if we were just in a field with nothing else, but the trees are really participants with us. And sitting by that yew tree, Charlotte, was, I went there yesterday, and just feeling the community of everybody here around, but also the stillness of the tree was a lovely relationship, Yeah.
But is there evidence of use of psychedelics and psilocybin in ancestral traditions in the British Isles? Because we're talking now about contemporary druids.
Sure, I can give a thread to that from the tradition of alchemy. So in alchemy, I said what is within is without. So we work with various maps of understanding ourselves and creation, and one is, you could call it the Trinity, the 3 levels of consciousness, of how it embodies in nature and ourselves. Christianity has that too, and it's very, should we say, expressed in Ayurveda and in Tibetan medicine too. But it's really simple. The Trinity is soul, spirit, body, okay? And so when making a medicine, the soul of a plant is the essential oil. The spirit of the plant is the alcohol, and the body is like the tea, fruit, whatever you're going to eat. So what I have been understanding in the realms of euphoric medicines, maybe that's psychedelics as well. So that was very much very present pre-King Henry VIII in the form of alcohols, okay? So throughout time immemorial, like, humans have always wanted a conduit to commune with the gods, to reach that liminal space of communication. And one of those, should we say, conduits has been alcohol, and it's so demonized in our culture. So the most ancient alcohol we have is mead, and in the Welsh language, metheglin, it means mead, but it also means medicine. And from what I'm understanding, that the alcohols that people were drinking from mead were very much infused with the euphoric medicines of the lands, like henbane, and I have a feeling that mushrooms are very much part of that. So I just wanted to talk about alcohol because we are told that it's, such a bad thing. But actually, this is just so typical of humans, of not understanding themselves and understanding actually what alcohol is, because it's very holy when made with a level of awareness and consciousness and connection. So when a fruit falls from the earth, like an apple, it naturally starts to decay, all right? And in its decay, and it's in the death of the matter of the fruit, it naturally starts to form a liquid, which is the alcohol. So in the resurrection, the death there's a resurrection of the spirit. An alcohol, a liquid, rises from the death of the body of the fruit. So it's just a beautiful natural thing that alcohol forms in nature. Honey naturally starts to ferment in the hive. It's all very natural. So when you're consuming alcohol, you're actually consuming the spirit consciousness of a plant. So when it's combined with mushrooms or other very euphoric herbs, it then starts to really potentize and extract and draw out the deeper physical properties of the mushrooms or the euphoric herbs, and becomes a very potent medicine. And so, like, it's been recorded that pre-Henry VIII, there was very euphoric beverages drunk in the British Isles. And then around his time, he wanted to dumb down people. And so the ales were like with hops instead, to like very calming, and you get a bit stupid and you have that kind of stupor. But prior to that, there was this understanding that the ales and the meads, they were with euphoric medicines to have that communion and to invoke that poetry and that communion with the gods.
I love the myth of Dionysus. So not obviously in the British context, but how it relates a little bit with this ancient Greek embodiment of Dionysus as this god of indomitable life force in the forests, and the cult around him of people escaping the cities and taking plant medicines and maenads dancing into trance-like states, and the threat that posed to the city and the people living there, and how Dionysus was disbanded and eventually was belittled to be the kind of god of wine, and then in the Roman pantheon, Bacchus is this kind of laughable, drunken figure. And I love the idea of reclaiming these mythologies and our attachments to the wildness that these plants and processes and fermentations can play, and our connections through them to other ancient ways of being, wilder ways of being. I think it's gone so fast, we've got time for maybe a few questions.
Can I just say quickly, because the question you asked about whether psychedelics were used in the past, Andy's written this fantastic book, Shroom, in which he very skillfully debunks the theory that druids were involved in any way with psychedelics in the past, or in fact that there was an indigenous use of them. But I believe you wrote that book about 10 years ago, was it? 20 years ago, wow. And I think you've started to change your mind.
Okay, I'm speaking from the law, LAW. A few years ago in Bolivia, an interesting pouch was excavated. It was made of 3 snouts of foxes sewed together. It contained a pipe and a grinder and residues of DMT, cocaine. It was very obviously someone's stash with the paraphernalia for taking drugs. Now that is unequivocal evidence that someone was intentionally using psychedelics whenever that pouch was dated from. We don't have that unequivocal evidence in the British Isles, or in fact in Europe. We've got evidence that people were using opium all the way back to the Neolithic. There is an unbroken tradition of people using opiates. We're still using them in our hospitals and on the streets, all the way back to the Neolithic. Henbane also has been found in ancient graves. Mugwort also, but not mushrooms. So in my book, I said there's just an absence of evidence, so we can't make a call either way. If you want to believe that the ancient druids didn't go near mushrooms, that's fine. If you want to believe that the ancient druids were like in Britannia, that amazing show, whacked off their heads on mushrooms all the time, so be it. but there's no evidence one way or the other. And that, with my law LAW hat on, that's where I left it. I've kind of, in the intervening 20 years, moved more over to the law LORE, and there's still no evidence. We could dig up that evidence. It could be preserved in a body, preserved in peat in Ireland, going to be dredged up, and we'll find the stomach contents are full of liberty caps. It could yet happen. But I like to think that the ancient Druids were our traditional wisdom keepers. There's one thing we know about them for certain, and that's that they didn't write anything down. And oral cultures are phenomenal. Look at India, Indian classical music, which you study for 18 years. The complexities, the richness of Indian classical music pisses on anything we can do in the Western tradition. And that's an oral tradition. You learn by heart. The knowledge that you can pass on from person to person is just profound, but it is vulnerable to one thing, and that's extinction. We put all our knowledge onto paper, which is vulnerable to fire, and now we are in the process of putting all our knowledge onto the cloud, which is atrophying our memories. Now we just look things up on... We can't even find our way home without the sat-nav. They're all vulnerable, but if you eradicate a generation through genocide, that knowledge is gone. And it's possible that that's what happened to the ancient Druids. We have a Roman record of a battle that took place in AD 60, Suetonius Paulinus. The Roman governor took his legions all the way to North Wales. They didn't even have the A5, and with the A5, it's a long way to North Wales. He marched his legions to North Wales, to Anglesey, for one reason, to take out the Druids. And there's this very pithy description of this battle that takes place, and the Romans won, and they said they burnt the sacred groves and destroyed the Druids. Well, if that's the case, and if the Druids were our indigenous wisdom keepers, all that knowledge could have been lost in a generation. It's not to say it couldn't ever come back, but we've, in these lands, gone through many of these deracinations, these uprootings, with the Christianization, with the Reformation. The Reformation destroyed loads. Britain was pretty much every 2 weeks there was a ritual or a pilgrimage or a village ale or a piss up or a knees up or a saint's day. All that went within a generation. Again, with industrialization and urbanization, all those rural customs that had grown up were gone. I'm rambling now. I like to think of the Druids as those traditional wisdom keepers, and if that's the case, maybe the memory of what they did is still in the land, is still in the water. You were talking about the water the other day, the recycling of the water. So with the law, LAW, we can't say. With the law, LORE, yeah.
We started a little late, so we'll go on a little bit and then just have a quick turnaround for our next speaker. So I think we've got about 10 minutes maximum for a few questions and to close. So,
thank you so much. It's been really fascinating. I'm speaking as a Christian pagan, and I have a question about whether you see any unique value in the Christian tradition as well. Often when people from two faith traditions speak, there's an incongruity because you're speaking from your lived belief to someone else's what you see as a history, or someone else's from the outside, right? But from the inside, Christian churches were built with Sheila gigs, as Raga over there standing up can attest to, and with green men. The stonemasons who built those churches still had a faith of in the old ways, and furthermore, contemporary Druids are quite different to ancient Druids in that there's no longer any human sacrifice, for example. maybe Christianity had a part to play in that kind of change in our consciousness. But fundamentally, for me, what Christianity kind of the kernel of it is that if you have the most powerful being in the universe, the logical answer to the question, what's the most powerful thing they can do, is actually to give up that power. And often when you do have power, it is the most difficult thing to do, to give up your power. I'm not saying that in any way contradicts a lot of these earth-based and alchemical spiritualities that you've so beautifully described today. But that kind of kernel, do you think that Christianity has added anything to our lives, or has it just divorced us from nature and walled us up? And that's my question, basically. Thank you.
If I can give quite a quick reply to that, because that's a fantastic question, and I think when you bring two approaches together, that's tremendously fertile. And if you Google druidry and Christianity, that should get you to our website, which is druidry.org. And there's this section on the website full of really interesting stuff. I've just completed a series of 3 conversations with a radical Christian priest where we talk exactly about this. Lots to say, very interesting, a guy called Sean O'Leary. So thank you for pointing that out. That's great. Thank you.
Great question, Mark. Thank you. I've had to do a lot of peacemaking with Christianity, and I think to my betterment. It was for a long time the kind of bogeyman in my life, and everything that went wrong was attributed to Christianity, which I now realise is mistaken. What's it given? Well, I would contest the human sacrifice thing.
Roman propaganda.
Roman propaganda. It's all the Romans' fault. There's an incredible beauty to Christianity, and I will still go and visit a country church, and they can have a profound numinous quality to them. At the same time, Christianity has formed institutions which are human organizations and are fallible to all the great ills of humanity, and we don't need to dwell on what they are, but we all know what they are at their worst. I think there's a peacemaking. You know, we're all desperate for indigenous wisdom. Christianity's been here for 2,000 years. It's very rooted in these lands. So yeah, there's a peacemaking, I think. All I would say is that in the conversation of ecology, the world religions have been rather late to the feast.
I would also maybe look online about alchemy within Christianity. So when what I'm understanding is when Christianity came to the country, there was very much a Celtic Christian marriage happening. There was priests and priestesses within the church. There was Jesus, and there was calling in the old gods and the elements, and there was practicing alchemy within the land. And within Christianity, they really absorbed alchemical traditions and rituals into the tradition, and with the coronation was actually put together by what we know today as St. Dunstan's. He was totally an alchemist, and what happened was like the kings knew the great power of alchemy, and they wanted to use it to kind of proclaim that they are worthy of their kingship, when they really actually just claimed it and killed loads of people. But just wanted to share something here. There's a lot, and that people don't know this, is that, you know, in Holy Communion, that is completely an alchemical equation. And I just would like to share that with you. So, you know, I said one of the maps is soul, spirit, body, that, you know, part of the trinity of consciousness inside ourselves. Is so when we consume the bread, that's the body, you know, it's called the body of Jesus, and the alcohol, the red wine, is the blood of Jesus. So what it's working in that ritual, as an alchemical ritual, is activating the body aspect of our consciousness and our spirit consciousness, to help open up our soul consciousness. So it's working in an upward direction to heaven, which, as we know, Christianity is really about going upwards, you know, and I think that's happened over time. That is what it's activating. It's activating an awakening of our souls, Holy Communion. But there was a time when using oil to anoint oneself, because I said oil is the plant, the essential oil of a plant is the soul consciousness. So there was a time when oil was used on a daily basis in anointing. And when that was done, it was about bringing heaven to earth and helping people have that embodiment of heaven. And I classically see that not really happening in the Christian religion, and they only use oil for very specific rituals such as baptism and ordaining of priests and bishops and kings and if you're sick. But we need to use the oils of bringing heaven to earth and bringing back that holiness of that, it's about coming down into the body and that we're on the earth and bringing that heavenly aspect down. So get involved with the anointing as well.
Ruby, do we have time? Or no?
I just want to add that I think it's important to differentiate between what was put in service to domination and power under the name of Christianity and the original teachings and what's been spoken about here, two completely different things, and they're often put together. We've got not really much time. Is there anyone desperate for a question?
Yeah.
Oh, also here.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I am hoping maybe there's an answer that's maybe on the website, so maybe I already know the answer, but just if you've got a few words of advice coming from the realm of mental health and dealing with people that have or are on their way to losing their mind through psychosis and schizophrenia. Do you have any advice for dealing with people in crisis?
If I could just suggest if you could Google or Ecosia, which is the eco-friendly version of Google, mental health and druidry, you should find that. Rather terrifyingly, if you type into ChatGPT, you'll get a very good summary of I think what I wrote actually. But yes, so on the druidry.org website and on my website too, which is just myname.com, I've tried to bring together the various strands and the way in which I believe druidry can be of value in mental health, working with trees, with nature connection, with developing a sense of meaning, with community, and various things. So yeah, have a look there. Okay.
We're sadly going to have to stop because otherwise we'll eat into the time of the next speaker. Thank you. And thank you so much to Andy, Charlotte and Philip, and we'll be here again